right, so today we are breaking down chapter 5, which is the fitness assessment approach in the weight loss manual. Um, so our objectives today, like what we want to definitely get through and kind of understand is we want to how to implement like subjective and objective assessments. So if we talk about like, subjective stuff, which is like not necessarily measurable, but very important information, or objective stuff, which is like, yeah, we're going to learn how to, measure that stuff and write it down so we can track our progress and track our numbers and things like that. Then we also need to be able to kind of communicate confidently what we found in that assessment. So we are going to kind of tie what was assessed versus like what we know. If we see somebody who's we analyze someone's BMI and it is, putting them in an obese category, we say, well, that puts you into the obese category. There are certain health effects that kind of come along with that. All right, we need to be able to kind of tie our findings in our fitness assessments to what we have been talking about in terms of our physiology lessons, right? And then use those findings to say, all right, well, now that we know, like, we know that this is what your current status is, and we know that this is the negative health effects associated with that, here's how we fix it. Right. So that'll be obviously probably the most important part of assessments. That's the whole reason we do assessments, right? Is we're trying to figure out how to fix something. So looking at sort of the intro here, right? Assessments, very useful for gaining insight into our clients, past and present medical history, right? But we're also trying to get past and present viewpoint of their physical history. So we want to figure out, like, yeah, if they do have any like medical conditions they may be dealing with, diabetes, hypertension, whatever, we want to be aware of them. We want to, know how to work with it so that we can make adjustments and, not necessarily treat it. Because again, we are not doctors. We're not treating things, but help manage it, And then we are also going to look at their physical history as well. Like if they have like a history of like ankle sprains, like, okay, well, it's like, oh, I have weak ankles because I keep spraining my ankle over and over again. And that's like, okay, well, why do you think you have, why do you think that keeps happening? Chances are it's like something to do with your posture, right? Your posture stands in a certain way that results in ankle sprains, or, why do you have this or why do you have that? So we're going to look at the physical history as well, or, how can you, what kind of cardio have you done in the past? How can we build on that foundation and get you even fitter? So your fitness assessment includes a thorough medical history. So we are going to kind of break down their general / medical history, current and past physical activity / dietary habits. So we are also going to just simply do through like interview and stuff a little bit about their physical activity, a little bit about their dietary habits and things like that. Physiologic assessments, which are obviously like kind of the ones that are usually a little bit more like cardiorespiratory system based. So physiologic assessments are usually the things that are like heart rate and blood pressure and stuff like that. And then just like general likes and dislikes about exercise. Like we do need to figure that out. That's a big part of assessments as well. It may be subjective, right? But it's huge. If I have a client, I'm like, all right, well, you have this problem. Let's say I have a client with hypertension, right? And we've talked about this in the past, but I'm not sure I've necessarily gone over it in depth in a while. If I had a client with hypertension, one of the best things you can do for a client with hypertension is set them up with a peripheral heart action circuit. And a peripheral heart action circuit is where you do an upper body exercise, then you do a lower body exercise, then you go back to the upper body, then you go back to the lower body, back, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. And so you do upper, lower, upper, lower, upper, lower, and however long the circuit happens to be. And what that does is that moves blood around the body because your body's like, all right, well, let's send all the blood to the legs because we're doing legs. Oh, crap, send all the blood to the shoulders like we're doing shoulders. Oh, no, back to the legs. And so your blood vessels actually, constrict and dilate, and it moves things around in really positive ways. Peripheral heart action circuits are fantastic for clients with hypertension. Now, let's say, talking about likes and dislikes, your client, for some reason, is aware that this circuit exists, and they're just like, look, one thing I don't want to do is a total body circuit. And it's like, well, you have hypertension. This would be great for you. And it's like, nope, that's just not something that I really want to focus on. Now, obviously, like right then and there, you could say, all right, well, you can walk away, but like you're trying to maintain this relationship with this client. So you're probably going to say something like, all right, well, we'll find another way, to also improve your blood pressure. So likes and dislikes, they do play a pretty big role, you may have things that, yeah, they are good for that client, but if they are good for them and you throw them into a routine because that's what is good for them, and then they never do their homework, they skip the gym all the time, they don't show up, um, it's not really the best exercise anymore, right? Because I would much rather have someone do an exercise that is maybe not as good for them as like the best exercise 5 days a week, then I would have them do it like once a week and then never show up again. you know um, so that's a big part of, again, like kind of understanding our subjective assessment stuff and understanding our clients like likes and dislikes. So let's go ahead and start. We are going to start with the subjective information, because that's always where our conversation starts, okay? So really quickly, I guess I had to start with I remember I wanted to start with a definition, so I just like threw one up here. But fitness assessments are useful for gaining insights into one's past and present medical/physical history. Okay, definition out of the way. All right, so a subjective assessment, right? This is all of the information that cannot necessarily be measured. It's valuable information, but it's not something that you can really slap a number on, your client's contact information is actually going to fall into this. Their goals, right? You can't necessarily slap a number on their goals, even though their goal could be number based. They could say they want to lose 10 pounds, right? We can't measure how much their goal is, or like their emergency contact info, or like what they do for a living, right? Their occupation is subjective. Again, if you were to ask somebody, it's like, hey, what do you do? And it's like, oh, I'm a nurse. You can't say something like, how much nurse are you? Like that sentence just doesn't really work. So it's immeasurable information. I think that I say this all the time, but I think that trainers sometimes, I think that most of the trainers that I know tend to be pretty objective when it comes to things. I think that we tend to, this is kind of an objective industry where we're focused on how much can you bench, and we're focused on how much, how much weight can we lose here? Or how many reps can I do it like this? How fast can I run a mile? It's a lot of number information that we're tracking, because that's how we're progressing, we want to know that hey, I did 35 on this last time and it was very easy. So I'm going to hopefully do, 40 this time. Good Lord, what is in my eyeball? Okay, sorry. I think I've put dog hair into my eyeball. So your subjective information, I think sometimes it's easy to rush through your subjective stuff because we're trying to get to the numbers, but I really emphasize the subjective information if I can, because it is really valuable. Objective information will tell you about someone's health status. Let's say you objectively measure someone and they are obese, right? But that doesn't necessarily help you understand how they got there. Your subjective information, where you ask them about their occupation, they're like, oh, I have a very sedentary job. You ask them about their diet and they're like, I eat a lot of sugar, right? A lot of things like this. And it's like, okay, now I'm starting to see the picture of it, right? So it's almost like objective information is the what and subjective information is the why. It's kind of the story behind how our client got there, which is really valuable for us to know, because we can help them kind of work through, changes that they may want to make. The first things first, though, the very first thing you are always going to do before you ever get into any of the objective stuff, which, possibly has a client moving around, we are going to go through a PAR-Q, a physical activity readiness questionnaire, right? So this is directed at detecting any possible cardiorespiratory dysfunction. So if your client says yes to any of the questions, make sure they are consulting their physician. Now, there is a slightly updated version of the PAR-Q. So NASM obviously has like, they have their new edition out this year. Here's the original PAR-Q, right? And it's all questions related to cardiorespiratory dysfunction, and then it's tied to the general/medical history questionnaire. But if you go to NASM's new version, nope, that's also the old version. It just looks different. All right, we'll just go to nasm.org. And downloads at the bottom, right? Webinars, PAR-Q. So here's the new PAR-Q. It's a little bit more involved, right? It's 4 pages, a little bit more. So it's going to start with some general health questions. We're just going to ask our clients like, hey, have you ever had like a heart condition, or, you know, do you have any high blood pressure? And then they're going to say yes or no, right? Do you feel chest pain in your chest during physical activity? All of this is pretty much the same. These are the same PAR-Q questions that we saw before, but now we've got a little bit of a better sort of flow on this legal document that can kind of protect us. And so it says if they answered no to everything, they are declaring, you know, they are cleared for physical activity, and then they are signing this participant declaration, meaning that like, all right, I passed all the tests, I don't have any problems, I'm going to engage in physical activity under my own free will, you know? And that way, like if let's say they're walking along and some member in your gym didn't put a dumbbell back, they trip and they fall, you are no longer held liable, right? They engaged in that physical activity like knowingly and, you know, of their own free will. So boom, we're set with that. So then we see what happens if they answered yes, right? So if they answered yes, then we're going to move on to pages like 2 and 3, right? We are going to take a look down here. We're going to see, it's like, okay, do you have any like osteoporosis, arthritis, things like that? So now we're going to ask a little bit about bone conditions, which is great, right? Joint problems that cause like pains and aches. Maybe they're on like steroid tabs or injections or whatever, right? Do they have any different types of cancers? So we're going to ask about that now, which is a little bit more involved. And then looking at the cardiovascular conditions, we're going to get into a little bit more like specifically, it's like, do you have do you have like an arrhythmia, you know, or, you know, do you have chronic heart failure, right? So now we're just trying to get a clear idea of like what this stuff is. High blood pressure, type 1, type 2 diabetes, which wasn't on the original version, even though that's obviously a very big deal. Mental health disorders, respiratory diseases, spinal cord injuries, if they've ever suffered from a stroke, and then any other medical condition that wasn't necessarily listed above that they may be dealing with. And so they can list that down here. So now we can see like if they answered yes to one or more of the follow-up questions, right? You should seek further information on becoming more physically active or engaging in physical appraisal. You should complete this specially designed online screening and exercise recommendations program here at this website, and we'll pull that up in just a second, and or visit a qualified exercise professional and work through that information. So now it's like, okay, if you answered yes to everything, this is basically a big fancy way of us saying like, you should talk to your doctor and make sure that your doctor says you are cleared to engage in a physical activity program before I am comfortable working with you. And that's basically all this is. It's just a legal document that kind of keeps us safe. Now, let's say they're like, yeah, my doctor, you know, had told me that they want me to like start working out so I can like improve my cholesterol. Okay, great. If that is like what they are saying and that's true, we don't necessarily need a doctor's note. We don't necessarily need, you know, we can take our client's word at, you know, we can believe them. And it's like, okay, well, then you're going to move down here and you're going to sign this, right? And they're going to, you know, they're going to say that they, you know, the participant declaration, right? And it says on here, I, the undersigned, have read, understood to my full satisfaction and complete the questionnaire. I acknowledge that my physical activity clearance is valid for a maximum of 12 months. On the day of completion, it becomes invalid if my condition changes. I also acknowledge the community fitness center may retain a copy of this. In these instances, will remain confidential. So basically, what we're saying here is, you know, I am declaring that yes, like I said, my doctor told me I was clear and told me to actually start exercising, and so I'm, you know, participating in this in my own free will. So if they say that they have like a doctor's note, that's okay. And let's say, like, what if they're lying? Let's say they never talked to their doctor and they're like, I'm just going to say yes so I can get through this Part Q. Let's say that happens. And then let's say that person gets hurt and they try to sue you, you know, and they go, I had this medical condition and you knew I had this medical condition. And I still got hurt, you know. Well, here's the thing, right? What's going to happen is like if they try to like threaten legal action, is like the proof is going to be on the, it's like, well, I asked you, like I run all of my clients through a Part Q, and we asked if you have any of this medical condition. You said you did. I said you need to talk to your doctor. You said your doctor had cleared you. And that is a verbal contract. In the state of California, verbal contracts hold up. I don't know about other states. I don't know what I would do if I was teaching this NASM stuff in other states, but I'm pretty sure it's like kind of the same thing. If your client lies to you, it does not, you do not, you know, you're not held any more liable than as if they were telling the truth. So that's something we don't really have to worry about. Because sometimes I get that. Sometimes I've had students be like, what do you do if they lie? And it's like, well, honestly, you're fine if they do. That's on them. You know, you are still legally protected. We have a lot of like stuff going for us in terms of like protection, you know. Obviously, like exercise is risky, but that it's okay that it's risky because, like, you know, number one, it's going to improve things in the long run, which is great. And number two, like, you know, both parties are very protected. You know, we are protecting our clients because of our like extensive knowledge, our clients, and we are protected from ourselves like legally. eparmedx.com. Uh-oh. Well, that might not, that's not good. All right, well, here's the website. There we go. So here's they have this kind of the Part Q online thing, right? And this, by the way, is something you can send to your clients sometimes. Like if you have if for those of you who are thinking about doing like Zoom sessions and stuff, you can send your clients to this version and have them fill this out online. But where is the eParamedX Plus? Is it this one? Sorry, let me get through one or two of these. Okay, I don't think this is actually what it is. Where is they have a little program, and you look to see if your client can get through that program. If they can get through that program, then that also is like, okay, well, you're you know, you're free and in the clear, you're in a good spot. Oh, by the way, there's also this one, just while I'm at it. Here's your physician's clear up. So if you let's say you do want a doctor's note, let's say you're being very, very cautious, right? Here's a version that you can download online and just have their doctor fill out. If you feel like doing that. I'll be honest, guys, I've actually never done that in my whole career. I've never actually had a client get me a physical doctor's note, but many times I have, you know, made sure that like I have clearance from their doctor. And by many times, I mean every time. So any questions about the Part Q? It's probably the longest I've talked about the Part Q. Any questions on that one, guys?
No, thanks.
Nobody's all freaked out. It sounds like sometimes like sometimes it sounds like our industry. I was talking to a doctor friend about this actually, because he gets the kind of the same thing. It's like some doctors are so hesitant to prescribe anything to fix anyone's problems. They're like, it's not really a problem. We're gonna leave it alone. And it's like, no, I want it fixed. Why won't you just like fix it? And I was talking to him about it. He was like, yeah, it's like the anxiety, it's like the anxiety of like, if I do prescribe it and it doesn't work or something happens, like the more we end up prescribing, the more likely it is that we will be at fault when someone gets hurt. And in this world of just like massive lawsuits that are happening all the time, it sometimes feels like you have a target on your back. And that can be true of trainers as well. You worry about like the fact that like someone might come after you, but you're very, very, very protected. As long as you don't step outside of your scope of practice, do things you are not supposed to do, you're fine, nothing to worry about. So that's the part Q. Let's take a look at the general/medical history questionnaire. This is also a new one up on NASM's website, which they nailed it on this one. They did a really good job. I don't know why I closed this. I'm gonna need it. Oh, God, I gotta kill this app. I gotta get rid of it. Pop-up is just driving me crazy. Where's that? Lifestyle and history handout. Love this new version of this. This is it's just a little bit better, and it's a little bit more streamlined than the old version. But you're gonna get their name and their age and gender and height and all that stuff. But then you're gonna say like what exercise activities do you currently partake in? Running, weightlifting, group exercise, whatever, right? So you're gonna list all that out. Anything that they might personally do. How many weeks do you get? How many days per week do you get 60 minutes of moderate intensity exercise? And they're gonna list that out. So it's kind of cool. It's a really good little like thing where we are kind of like taking our subjective information and we're kind of making it a little bit more objective and a little bit more measurable. We're looking, it's like, okay, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's important to you? Weight loss, muscle gain, sports performance, or health improvement? Some people, it's like, I'm here for weight loss, right? Because I'm trying to look a specific way. Some people are like, I want to gain some muscle. I'm trying to like, I guess also kind of look a certain way. Sports performance, they're like, I want to be able to lift this much weight, and so I can, be good at this. Or some people are like, I don't care how I look, I don't care what my weight is, I just want to get my cholesterol normal. Great, love it, cool. And then we're going to ask them a little bit about their diet as well. So your health history questionnaire, we'll get into the diet in just a second, allows health and fitness professionals to identify any medical contraindications, risk factors, or behaviors that are going to affect their ability to exercise. If they say something like, how many days a week do you get 60 minutes of moderate intensity activity? And they're like, 0, goose egg. I do not. I am not physically active in any way, shape, or form. Like, all right, this is going to be a little bit more challenging, a little bit of a longer road, but that's okay, right? So you're gonna, like I said, get their contact info, get their general medical history, get a risk factor assessment, a list of any medications they happen to be on, which we're actually going to see when we get down here. So in the medical part, any musculoskeletal injuries, surgeries, chronic conditions, medications, right? And then there's this big section for additional notes, which is honestly where I spend most of my time. This is where I'm like writing down a lot of my clients' goals and things like that. Now, in this new version, if we go back up, it's a little out of order compared to how my slides are set up here. We've also got some information on diet now. NASM finally threw the freaking diet information. It's not on like a separate page anymore, which is so great. But like you're going to ask your client on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you consider your overall diet to be healthy? So again, kind of objectifying. That word is so evil, but in this case, it's a normal thing. Our subjective assessments, right? We're throwing some numbers into this immeasurable stuff. Are you currently? I love this part. Are you currently following any kind of diet? And if so, why? Right? So if they're like, well, I do keto, and it's like, why do you do keto? And it's like, because keto works, and it's like, Okay. Did other diets not work? Or if they're just like, I'm on the Atkins diet, which is similar to keto, right? We just want to figure out like what it is that they are sort of like, because we can kind of find it, right? We can find like different people, Do you guys want, man, I had a guy one time, I had a young kid that I was training, not like super young or anything, but he was like early 20s. And he was just really skinny. He was just like it was kind of short, kind of skinny. And he was like, I'm just trying to gain muscle and I'm, having a hard time with it. And I was like, yeah, man, you gotta rabbit's metabolism, I identify with that. I get it. And so he was like, yeah, I've done everything. And he's like, I even went on the Go Mad diet. And I was like, what is the Go Mad diet? Bay, Lorianne, and Jerica. Have you guys ever heard of the Go Mad diet? Nobody? Sorry. All right, let's look this up. Go Mad diet. Healthline, yeah, definitely. It's gonna say, do not do this. It is the gallon of milk a day diet. So the idea is that you are, in addition to your normal meal, getting an additional gallon of milk a day, which is a massive amount of 2,400 calories, So yeah, that's definitely going to put you into a calorie surplus. Anyway, this kid had been on that, and it was just like, not great. He, not good results. He didn't have lactose intolerance, but he felt like he did because nobody has that much lactase, Insane. So anyway, we ask about that. We ask about like, are they, how would you rank your salt intake? Man, that one, no. That's the one I struggle with. How do you rate your sugar intake? That one's fine. How do you rate your fat intake? I'm definitely killing that one. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you able to control your temptations with like junk food? Love asking this question. It's like, hey, like what's the one thing that kind of knocks you off, what's the thing that kind of, if you're really on the wagon, like what is it that kind of derails you really easily, and that's gonna be a little, everybody's gonna have kind of a fun answer for that because everybody's got different things, for me, like if I like when I go to a movie theater, like I have to have like movie theater popcorn, and like I usually get like something chocolate based, and I usually get like a soda, and it's not great. Like that's all bad. But it's like I just feel like I'm not at the movies if I didn't, so it feels, so it's like, well, all right, well, how often does that happen? And it's like, if it happens like once a month, okay, well, that's not really gonna hurt you, you're gonna be fine. And that's why like this new version of like freaking pandemic world, part of me loves like the fact that like movies just come up on the streaming services now and you just stay home. I'm like, this is great for my health. And then like, yeah, how many alcoholic drinks do you consume per week? Alcohol has no redeeming qualities. It is bad for us in every capacity. So being aware of it. And then caffeinated beverages. And I like, this is one, it's like how many per week? I will like to say which caffeinated beverages. I usually have my client indicate to me, which caffeinated, because if it's soda, there's a lot more sugar in that. When compared with like, well, if they're making like their own coffee, like I put sugar in my coffee, I put sugar and milk in my coffee, like there's 2 teaspoons in here, plus the sugars that are in the milk. So like I'm getting about 10 grams of sugar in like a cup of coffee, but like I only do like 1 cup of coffee a day, maybe 2. 20 grams of sugar is not unsubstantial, but 20 grams of sugar times like 4 calories, that's 80 calories out of a diet, that's about 3% of my diet. That's not really hurting me that much, and I usually do it around like times like after I work out in the morning. And so it's mostly like restoring my glycogen anyways. But that's obviously like, okay, well, that's probably like an exception to a rule. A lot of people, they probably don't follow things like that. So figuring out like what it is that they're drinking, when they're drinking beverages, a lot of people drink their calories without realizing it. And then we're going to get an idea of maybe some, if we want to get really in depth with things, we can do other types of assessments. We can dive into those assessments that we talked about in our nutrition class, right? We can do a 24-hour dietary recall. You know, I could say, Bay, all right, walk me through. What was the last thing you ate? And then let's go back 24 hours until yesterday, right? That'll give me a kind of a really quick, very easy overview of what hopefully it was a typical day kind of looks like. Or we could ask them to do like a food frequency questionnaire. And this is one that NASM doesn't have out there, unfortunately. So you're just going to have to Google a version of this or make your own. But there's a lot of them out there. I mean, honestly. Here's the first link I clicked. Actually, this didn't quite take me to what I wanted. Yeah, okay. Well, okay. Let's not do the first link. You know what? There we go. So here's like a version of this. It's like, how often do you have? And then like we ask them these certain things. You can make it as specific as you want. You can make it as general as you want. I honestly don't like, I like food frequency questionnaires, but honestly, like we already kind of covered some of that in this new version of the medical history. It's like, you know, salt intake, sugar intake, fat intake, and then, you know, alcoholic drinks and like caffeinated sugary beverages. And it's like, all right, well, now I got a pretty clear idea actually. That's about food frequency. But if you want to go more in depth, you always can. And then there's actual food records. There's food logs. If your client happens to have already been doing like MyFitnessPal or something, great, let's take a look. Or like, you know, if you, in preparation for this session, had told your client to like log their food, it's like, hey, we're going to meet up on Thursday, and you're having them like log every day until then, great, let's take a look at it, you know? That's pretty rare. I can only think of like literally one time in my entire career where I've had someone actually do something before our first assessment. And that was because like I knew them through like a different relationship. So it's like, that's probably not actually very relevant. All right, any questions on the subjective stuff before we dive on into objective stuff? Got a thumbs up from Bay. Lorianne, Jerica, you guys feeling good?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Love it, love it. All right, Jerica, this is the last time you and I are going to talk about assessments, by the way. Don't get me wrong, you're going to talk about it with Mo. Plenty. Mo is really into assessments. I think Mo's more into it than I am actually. So you're definitely gonna get your fill again, but it's kind of a momentous day, you know.
Nice.
All right. So objective stuff, right? The measurable stuff, the stuff we tend to, you know, put a little bit too much of, you know, our outcome goal stuff, you know. Objective stuff is the measurable information, right? This can be used, this is great because you can compare beginning numbers to ending numbers, right? Like if you're tracking your weight loss consistently and you're like, all right, I was 150 pounds today and 149 pounds yesterday, and I was 151 pounds the day before and 154 pounds before that. And that's like, you check it out and it's like, yeah, like I'm a little heavier today than I was yesterday, but that could be water. My average is going down consistently. Great, there we go. You know, your weight's gonna fluctuate. That's okay. You know, depends on how hot your room was. It depends. There's a lot of factors that can screw up. Depends on the quality of your sleep. So we measure that stuff. It can be great to compare your numbers, you know, or like, you know, it's like, hey, like, let's see if this program is working. And you test them, and maybe you had your client do like a tug test, right? Like the stand up from a chair, walk around a cone and sit, how long it took them. It's a cool assessment. I was just saying to my client, my new client, who she was talking about her parents and, you know, trying to get her parents to a place where they're healthy because they have a hard time like getting up and off the floor if they ever get down to the floor. And I was like, yeah, that's a big deal for seniors. Like that's actually like, getting up from the floor is a big deal because like if there's ever a fall, like sometimes like they just can't get up. And so like, I had 2 clients one time who had read that in AARP magazine, and then they read this assessment. It's like, if you can get up, one of the things you can do to practice is get up without using your arms. And they were like, how the hell are you supposed to get yourself off the floor without using your arms? And I was like, well, and we broke it down, and I taught them how to do sort of a modified version of, if you guys know the Turkish get up, which is a freaking great exercise. Actually, yeah, we'll do a GIF here so we can see the whole thing. But it basically is where using a kettlebell, is that not actually a GIF? There we go. Use a kettle. Oh my God. All right. There you go. You can kind of bring yourself all the way up into standing, and you leave that arm straight the entire time. It's pretty hard to like balance. It's a lot of core work. So we did sort of a modified version of that. And we did an assessment where we tested how long it took them to get up off the floor on day 1. And then, we worked on this program that was kind of written around this little theme. And then we did it again, 4 or 6 weeks later, or something like that. And they were like, they saw their improvements and they were really motivated and thought that was kind of fun. So sometimes that's another thing, like on the outside of like the fitness assessment, like use it to write programs for the efficacy of physiologic, improvement. Sometimes your fitness assessments just help you write a program because it helps your client find something fun, so that's kind of cool. So objectively, we've got a couple different categories. We have got physiologic assessments. Those are going to be like heart rate, blood pressure, things like that. Body composition assessments, which are things like body fat percentage, waist circumference measurements, or just circumference measurements in general, things like that, BMI. Although it's funny because like BMI has nothing to do with body composition. It's just height versus weight, but it does fall into that category. Cardiorespiratory assessments like the YMCA step test, which is probably not very applicable to our weight loss clients because of how high impact it is. Instead, we'd probably do something like a Rockport walk test or something similar. We could put somebody on like a spin bike, whatever. There's, Wingate tests and things like that. And then posture and movement assessments, probably my favorite category, because then we're going to be like, oh, well, you move this way. We need to strengthen this muscle so you can move this way. And then performance assessments, which is them versus future them. The Turkish get up little routine that I had written was kind of based around a performance assessment, right? Yeah, all of this other stuff improved as well, but it's like they wanted to improve at this one particular thing. It's them versus future them, right? The Sharks skill test, the Davies test, bench press assessments, barbell squat assessments. It's like, is your weight going up? All those like improvements that we're looking at, right? Great. Those are performance assessments. So looking at, oh, that's right. I remember this. I remember the last time I taught this class, and this slide is like out of order or something. Body mass index is going to be a big one. Body mass index will fall under body composition down here, but we've talked to body mass index to death, but it is their BMI, it's their weight in kilograms divided by their height in meters squared. If it's above 25, they are overweight until it gets to 30, in which case, if it's above that, they are obese. And below 18.5 is also underweight, and that's also not great. And I would, if there's an argument to be made, I would say like being underweight is way more dangerous than being overweight, because being overweight could be contributed through like muscle mass. Being underweight cannot, basically. So looking at that, moving into our next category here, talking about physiologic assessments. This is about your clients, like general, like this is very much like health based, right? So we are looking at the various versions of like heart rate, and things like blood pressure. So when it comes to heart rate, we use heart rate in a lot of different ways, which is why we have a lot of different like numbers when it comes to like our client's heart rate. There's the classic just resting heart rate. So we're going to measure our client's radial pulse, right? So your heart rate is the number of beats in 60 seconds time, and it's half of our equation for our cardiac output, which is the overall performance of your heart, right? Cardiac output, your heart rate times your stroke volume. We can't measure stroke volume in the gym. It's just not very practical. We don't know how much blood is being pumped out of a heart every time the heart squeezes, but we do know that it is tied to their heart rate. So if their heart rate is really high, then then that indicates that their stroke volume is probably pretty low, which means their whole cardiac output is probably lower than it should be, or at least lower than it can be. And if their heart rate's really low, great. It means that their body's like, yeah, I don't have to beat that often. And it just sends a ton of blood. That's great. So we're going to measure this in a couple different ways. We got the radial pulse here. Lightly place 2 fingers along the arm in line just above the wrist, in line with the thumb and index finger. So you would do this on the right hand, but my watch is in the way. So you would go right here. That's basically it. That's an easy one. Actually, you know what's one of my favorite ways to do it, because I don't want to look like, if I'm in public sometimes, if I'm not wearing my heart rate watch, which normally I'm just wearing my heart rate watch, but that same artery, your radial artery, actually continues traveling down into your palm right here, and mine happens to be huge. And so I will sometimes actually just go like this and count my own pulse by just kind of closing my hand into a fist, and I'll feel like that. And that way, like, I don't have to be like, what's my pulse, like, because I don't want people, I don't know, I don't want to be judged. I guess I probably don't do it anymore, but young self-conscious me would. So then we also got a carotid pulse. This one is the one that NASM doesn't recommend as often. I mean, if you can't get the radial pulse, yeah, go for the carotid. Like, you want to know what their heart rate is. But we recommend radial because it's just a lot more comfortable for your client. Carotid, you're going to lightly place 2 fingers just on the side of the larynx here. And, big artery that runs right up the side of your head there. Great place to check it. It's just uncomfortable. It's like, you're putting your hands on a stranger's neck, so it's not everybody's favorite thing. NASM recommends, they like the radial. Now, in general, when we're talking about like average resting heart rates, they should be somewhere around like 70 beats per minute for most of our male clients, about 75 beats per minute for our female clients, in terms of average. Now, if their heart rate is lower than that, generally that's going to be a good thing. And maybe it's possible they have, like, bradycardia, which is like a medical low heart rate. That's not great. But if generally their heart rate is maybe 5-10 beats below like these numbers here, that's a good sign. It's like, hey, like, you're cardiovascularly in very good shape. Your heart gets the same job done that someone else's does, and yours does it in less beats. Congrats, right? That's exactly what we're going for. And then female clients, right? Same thing, about 75. So probably, if it's, down to 70, or if it's at 65, right? That's a really good sign. So once we figure that out, then we can figure out their training heart rate zones. And we actually don't even necessarily need to know what their resting heart rate is to get their training heart rate zones in the basic version. But we like the version that's a little bit more complicated. We like this heart rate reserve method. So let's say you didn't take into account their resting heart rate. Well, to figure out a client's target heart rate zones, you would just use the percentage of their max heart rate, or heart rate max. And that's what a training zone is. It's a percentage of an individual's maximum heart rate. So your heart rate max is 220 minus your age, always. It's a number that's one of the formulas you guys want to have up here. It is always just the number 220 minus however old they are. So if they're 40 years old, 220 minus 40, that's going to be 180, right? So then we're going to work at a percentage of that. So if we're trying to be between 65 and 75%, well, we take 180, that was their heart rate max, times 0.65, and then times 0.75, right? And then we just calculate all that out. And that's good. It's not bad. It'll get us to a spot. So if I had a client, who is 40 years old, and then we'll get into this in just a second. Right, there we go. There's our, I don't know why this website's like where they're kind of blank here, but you can see like 65% is 117, 75% is 135, or 135 to 153, or 153 to 171. So there's my ranges. A little bit of simple math. But like it's not incredibly specific. You know, it's not necessarily getting into, it's not taking into account the client's individuality. So we use the heart rate reserve method instead, or we call this the Karvanen formula, right? And this is going to calculate your target heart rate by using the difference between your maximum heart rate, which is 220 minus your age, and your resting heart rate, which is the number of beats while you are at rest. So luckily we had already gathered their resting heart rate up top, and we have that number now. So if I go back to my client, I said, let's say their resting heart rate's 75 beats per minute. And I go down here, well, now their 65% is way higher. I mean, look at this. It was 117 before, now it's 143. That's different, right? 143 to 154, 154 to 164, 164 to 175. So what this does is this kind of like narrows the range. It makes it a little bit of a smaller window, which means more specific, right? And so like that's why we really like that Karvanen formula there. And you can see it's a little bit more complicated. It's the max heart rate, that's the 220 minus your age, minus the resting heart rate. Then you multiply the intensity, and you slap that resting heart rate back on at the end. Then we've also need to get our client's blood pressure. We want to know that systolic and diastolic number. Generally, guys, you guys do have the, we did give you the blood pressure cuffs in your bags. I love to say this word, sphygmomanometers. Those are in your bags and stuff, but you don't necessarily, honestly, like need to be an expert on like how to do those blood pressures. They are not as accurate, but the electric ones, which are literally like $25, if you're going to do regular blood pressure testing, just get one of those. They're good enough for our purposes. And I know like you'll hear people say it's like, oh, that's not quite as accurate. And I don't necessarily disagree. But the amount that they are accurate for the price, time, and effort, in my opinion, is very, very, that's a good ratio. It's a good cost of value ratio. So systolic number, that's the your pressure during systole, which is the contraction of the heart. And then you've got your diastolic number, that's the amount of pressure in your arteries during the relaxation of the heart. So you've got systole, diastole, systole, diastole. And here's the protocols for doing that. I'm not going to go through all these today because we have talked about those more in depth in other classes. Body composition assessment. Oh, actually, sorry. Any questions on the physiologic assessment category? Thumbs up. All righty. Use this opportunity as well. I do want you guys to ask questions, but I also want to use it as a water break. All right. So body composition assessments. We are going to see a lot of different ways that we can test this. Body composition could be just body weight, you know, and by the way, we have another one of those forms up on NASM's website. So you can see here's their body composition assessments little worksheet here, right? And this is only one page, but we can put our client's name, we put their height, we can get their scale weight. We can use that to now calculate out their BMI. And they are starting with circumference. All right, so we're gonna go down here to skin fold. And then you can see we are gonna do, we're writing the protocol that we use. So the one that's kind of listed here in this PowerPoint, which is the one that NASM was using for a really long time, but now I think they're just teaching all of them, is oh my God, I'm forgetting what I keep wanting to say, Harris Benedict. That's the wrong name. Oh, Durnan-Wamersley. So it's the Durnan formula. So you would write which protocol you use up here. That's for you, not for them. And then you would do your measurements. And honestly, like I guess if you see what measurements it is, you'll know what protocol it is. But Dern-Walmersley is a four-site method. So it's subscapular, biceps, triceps, and suprailiac. It's just above the knob on the pelvis there. So it's a four-site method. But here you can see there's, there are 7-site methods out there. There's other versions. So whichever version you decide you want to do. With a skin fold measurement, you are basically going to estimate body fat percentage by measuring skin fold girth. So the Dern-Walmersley formula is going to calculate it using a four-site method, like I said, biceps, triceps, subscapular, and suprailiac crest, or just above the iliac crest. It's above the knob, not bad. Honestly, like, it's okay if you want to do this version. I like it because it is kind of cool to have like more numbers and look for improvements in that, like, over time. But at the same time, it's kind of long, it's kind of involved, and it literally involves pinching your client. Not awesome. And this is very ineffective the more obese that our client is. So the heavier they are, the more likely skin fold measurements are going to be inaccurate. So definitely not as effective, in extremely obese clients or seniors for that matter, while we're talking about it. But we are measuring it through like skin fold thickness. And when you're doing this, make sure you are taking at least 2 measurements at every site. And that way, like, you can, average them out. And so you would do left and right, measurement 1, left and right, measurement 2. Work your way that way. Actually, sorry, that's not even true. I'm sorry, I was thinking of circumference measurements. Blah, totally forgot what I just said. All of these things, all of these things are done on the right side of the body. That's where we're looking at that. But you do take 2 measurements just to make sure you didn't squeeze too hard or something like that. And if your numbers are really, really far off, maybe do a 3rd one. But honestly, way more accurate than that is, okay, here's what they look like, by the way. Biceps, triceps, subscapular, iliac crest. Cool. Add them all up. I'm sure there are, Dern calculator. Yeah, sure enough. Here's a little Dern-Walmersley calculator. Now I have no idea what these numbers. Oh, hold on. Oh, it's an app. Okay, great. There you go. So you can use an app, and it'll do all the math for you. So you don't necessarily have to do the whole thing. But male, 25 years old, 175 pounds. Let's say it was like 6 millimeters on the biceps, 9 millimeters on the triceps, 15 on the subscapular, and we'll go back to 9 on the suprailiac. I'm making these numbers up. I could have made a very weird person here. We'll see. So we add all those up, 6 plus 9 plus 15 plus 9, and then we look in the table based on their age and what that total number was. So if we look at where that lands them, body fat mass is about 15.9%. I actually did pretty well. All right, yeah. All right, I made an average person. Oh, good job. So 15.9% there. So that's putting them, right in the average level. Awesome. So that is skin fold measurements. Okay. I like other ones. I like bioelectric impedance personally. I think it's a much more convenient, very quick way to do things. Where is bioelectric? So bioelectric impedance estimates your body fat percentage by measuring the speed at which a small electric current is going to run through the body. So again, we use that little bioelectric impedance tool. There's a lot of them out there. Honestly, you could just buy one of these, keep it in your car, and bring it to work with you if you wanted to, like get a little scale. A lot of gyms actually have these now, or you could buy one of the Omrons. If you can find one of these online, for a reasonable freaking price. Now they're, look at that, it says 350 bucks. These were literally $20. These were literally $19.99 a couple years ago. And now they stopped making them because the company is making like scales instead now. And oh man, it's crazy. Like people, like the internet has just been selling these for so much money now. And it's like, you know, you can get this more complicated, you know, this is what they're making now. It's the actual Omron plus a scale, and they're attached together. So you kind of use this like wire here. And it's like, yeah, that is probably more accurate, but it is way less convenient. And oh man, this is like one of those things where you hear about people like collecting freaking baseball cards. It's like, I wish I would have bought more of those when I was younger. Sell them like crazy like now. But that's bioelectric impedance. It runs an electric current. If that electric current travels really quickly, we know that, like, you know, the electricity is running through tissue that has a lot of water in it because water conducts electricity. But if it travels really slowly, then it's running through tissue that probably has more lipids in it because fat is an insulator. So the higher the body fat mass, the more impeded the flow will be. Then we can actually calculate, once we know their body fat percentage and we have their body weight, we can calculate out their overall body composition. And this is another one that's not necessarily here on this sheet. So if you want to make your own and add it to it, you know, you can really calculate out these numbers. And so here's some simple math that shows us how to do this. So your body mass is your fat mass plus your fat-free mass. That's how much you weigh. It's your body mass. It's your body weight. Okay, that's mass. But if you want to figure out what your fat mass is, you would take your body mass and you would multiply it by your body fat percentage. So we go back to our client a minute ago who was 175 pounds and they were 15.9% body fat. So I would say 175 times 0.159. And because I moved the decimal twice, right? So the percentage. And then that means that they have 27.8 pounds of fat mass, okay? Then their fat-free mass is their overall body weight minus this number. So that means that 147 pounds of lean body mass. So now, if I calculate that out, and you can see here's another example, 200-pound client with 30% body fat, that's 60 pounds of fat, 140 pounds of lean mass. Now, let's say, you know, this client loses 10 pounds, I can track to see like how much of that was muscle and how much of that was body fat. And it's a much more accurate, much better way to address things. Because sometimes your client will be like, why am I not losing any weight? And then you look at their body composition and it's like, well, you're kind of gaining a lot of muscle mass. And so it's kind of keeping the scale from budging. And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. And then, you know, other times it's like, hey, you're losing a lot of weight. You're also losing a substantial amount of muscle mass. We need to look at, like, you know, upping your calories a little bit, or at least upping your protein or something, you know, something's going on. And then we got circumference measurements. Your circumference measurements are really very cut and dry, easy way to calculate out a client's, you know, neck measurement, chest measurement, arms, waist, hips, thighs, calves. I tried to get into my old Google Drive from where I used to work, because I made one years ago for WellFit. And I was going to show you guys like what our old body composition assessment used to look like, because we had a little like Excel sheet that we would use really quickly. But anyway, we don't have it anymore. You got a lot of different sites. You can do this 7-site method here. Or you can just pick the ones that you like. Where I used to work, we would do chest, waist, and hips. And that was it. That was all we cared about. So when you are doing your measurements, the neck is across the Adam's apple, center of the neck there. Your chest is across the nipple line or across the first apparent flattening of the chest. So with like female clients, you do go across like just wherever the chest tends to flatten out. However, I'll be honest, guys, I think that that is a really subjective thing that honestly we are prone to messing up. Like your eye line might say this is the flattest part one day, and then this is the flattest part the other day. The way I like to have my clients do a chest measurement, every client just straight across the nipple line. The one thing I will say, and I'm sure you guys all know kind of what I'm talking about here, definitely tell your client to wear the same outfit every time it's reassessment day. So this is also one of the reasons why, and it's not in this assessment PowerPoint, but I will often also do before and after pictures for my clients. And I do those not even necessarily to motivate them with the before and after photos. I do it because it's a very easy way to remind them what they were wearing. And that's helpful. Because definitely like chest measurements will fluctuate like crazy depending on like the bra that someone is wearing and stuff. So that's how I like to do it. NASM disagree. They're going to go with the first apparent flattening. Both are good. Both are fine. And when you're doing these, make sure that your client is the one like placing these. I mean, you guys probably have a little less to worry about than I do as like a male measuring like female clients. The method for keeping your client comfortable is to grab the tape measure, hold it up, demo where you want them to hold it, and then you give it to them. They will place it, and then you just go right behind the back of the arms. And the only thing you end up touching is just the very top part of their upper back. Piece of cake. Just to make sure you can actually see this lady kind of goofed it up. This is why I always bring this up when I see this photo. She's going under his armpit. That's freaking inconvenient. If she was doing more of I mean, I think that's probably just for the sake of like this photo, they wouldn't be able to like show her measuring effectively. Like, but she should be behind him. Like she should try to get like where the tape comes together, like in the middle of his upper back. That's a way more comfortable spot for all of our clients. Waist measurements, and the same thing goes here, by the way. Waist measurements is always going to be at the narrowest part of the waist. Unless there is no narrow part of the waist, then you are going to go at the belly button. So that is how we do waist measurements. The narrowest part of the waist is really important here because we are going to use it in a minute to look at our waist to hip ratio. Your hips, the widest part of the hips as viewed from the front, right? So the widest portion there. Thigh measurement, 10 inches above the patella. Not everybody's going to have 10 inches above their patella. Not everybody's going to have 10 inches of femur. If you got a shorter client, make some other number up. Pick 6 inches, pick whatever you want to pick. But either way, like, you just take the tape measure from the kneecap, measure it up 10 inches, and that's where you take that measurement every time. And then calf at the widest circumference of the calf. Same thing is true of the biceps, by the way. Did they put biceps on here? Yeah, arms. Yeah, arms should also be at the widest part of the bicep. And you can do that either flexed or unflexed if you want to have your client do that. Sometimes like people want to know what their peak bicep is. And it's like, all right, we'll do both versions. If you're like really training like a bodybuilder or something, it's kind of fun. So that is that. Now, the waist to hip ratio is probably the one that's most tied to like, probably the most medically important of the circumference measurements. And so we do know there's a correlation between abdominal fat in particular. Midsection fat is much more dangerous, right? So what we do is we look at the ratio. How many inches was the waist? How many inches was the hip? And we divide those, right? Waist divided by hips. Ideally, we want that ratio to be below 0.8 for our female clients or below 0.95 for our male clients. And those numbers are a little bit different because women are going to have a wider pelvis, like structurally with bones. Any questions on circumference measurements? Did I move through that a little too quickly? Everybody good on that? All righty. Let's look at the cardio. So cardio assessments, right? Very valuable information about like, how well our client breathes and supplies oxygen to all of their cells, because that's really what our cardiovascular system's doing, right? So provides a very, very valuable information because honestly, this is the one that it's keeping the thing that powers your entire body alive. So we love it. So two versions of cardiorespiratory assessments, or I'm sorry, what the purpose of cardiorespiratory assessments. It gives us a really clear starting point for our client. Earlier, we figured out what their target heart rate zones were using that Karvanen method. Actually, I don't have it up anymore. We figured out using the Karvanen method what their zones are, but maybe that top 76 to 85%, or really high top 85 to 90, 86 to 95% of their max, like that zone 3, that might be a little too much, for a lot of our clients. That might be too much stress for their heart. So we need to figure out like what program is going to be most specific for them. One of them is going to be the Rockport walk test. Rockport walk test, we use this to estimate our VO2 max based on a sub-maximal bout of a 1 mile walk. So they are walking as fast as they can, but they are not breaking into a jog, okay? This is going to determine their target heart rate zones. So if we take a look here, here's the Rockport walk test calculator. So we have let's say a female client, age 45. Let's say she weighs 192 pounds, and her heart rate at the end of 1 mile of walking, let's say it was 145. And it took her 16 minutes and 12 seconds to complete, right? If we calculate this out, that would put her into the poor category, right? So she's only like the top 31% of her population. Her VO2 max, the amount of oxygen she can maximally consume, is about 25.05 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight. So she's consuming some oxygen. Like we're measuring someone's VO2 max. That's telling us how much mitochondria they have in their cells, how much hemoglobin they're transporting. The higher that number is, the better, because it means it's like, hey, you've got more stuff that consumes oxygen, rather than like fat cells, which don't really have as many mitochondria, right? Having more stuff that doesn't consume as much oxygen, right? With her, since she landed in the poor category, well, then we're only going to give her maybe a zone 1 workout. But let's say she walked a little bit faster than that, right? Let's say she was able to pick up that pace, drop 2 minutes off her Rockport walk test. Well, now it's going to put her in the average category, right? She's going to get a 54 on her score, which is great. Her VO2 max is going to go up to 31. We're seeing some good improvements here. That would qualify her for zone 2. And then if she did, let's say she drops another 1 minute off, 13 minutes, and her heart rate drops by 10 beats per minute, and we hit calculate here, that's going to put her in the good category. So now maybe she's going to be able to qualify for like a full zone 3 workout. We're going to get her up to 86 to 95% of her heart rate max. So poor, fair, both of those are zone 1. Average and good are zones 2, and very good is zone 3. Or the modified version in your book, poor, fair, good / very good. That's fine. There's an inconsistency there. Sorry, it's driving me crazy. And then there's the YMCA step test, which is actually pretty much the same thing. It's just a different protocol. So for the YMCA step test, which we don't have in this PowerPoint because this honestly is not very applicable to our obese clients. It's a little bit too much impact. It's a little too hard on the knees. But you are basically going to set up a 12-inch box that your client is going to step up onto at a very specific pace. So they're going to use a metronome app. And the metronome is not necessarily just to like keep them at pace so that we're making them go a certain speed. It's to make sure that they do exactly the same number of steps every time they take the test. The less they fall off of that, the more they are getting, we're applying the same level of stress, 12 inches, 3 minutes, and at 96 steps per minute to every client who has ever performed this test every time, right? So then you're going to have them turn around and sit. And then rather than just figuring out what their heart rate is the second that test was over, which is how we did the Rockport, now we're going to measure how well does their heart rate recover in the end? You know, um, it's kind of similar to, I don't know if you guys ever did like experiments in high school or college or whatever. If you ever had a science class that was like testing like drag, um, but like, you know, you can accelerate two objects at the same speed, and if one of them slows down faster, it has a higher level of drag. Well, if the heart rate slows down faster, then that means that the heart is recovered and the body cells are good. They are recovering from exercise better. They're in better cardiovascular health. Someone's heart rate is not recovering over the course of a minute very quickly. Well, they're you know, heart's having a hard time like keeping up. So we look to see what their heart rate is after a full 1 minute's time. This is another reason why this is not the most convenient assessment. I mean, it's not bad. It takes 5 minutes compared to Rockport, which can take, you know, 15 minutes. But let's say it's a female client, right, who was like between 26 and 35, and her heart rate recovered to like 112. That would put her right between the average and below average category, right? So she would qualify for a zone 1 routine. So that's Rockport, or that's the YMCA step test. Again, you're probably not going to use that in obese populations. Posture and movement assessments. Love these. These are my favorite ones to talk about, right? So posture, obviously we have like, we need to have like a base of support by which we exert all of our force. That is your posture. It's the baseline for where your body is before, you know, you start doing whatever movement it is you're going to do. So it's the alignment and function of any part of the human movement system at any given time. And it allows us to move the way that we are supposed to, you know, rather than, you know, ways that we don't. So when it comes to posture assessments, it's going to help us, the fitness professional, determine the basic structural and functional status of individuals. And we're going to base it on these 5 major kinetic chain checkpoints, right? This is going to help us understand like the alignment, how their force couple relationships are, what are their joint motions and mechanics, what's their neuromuscular efficiency. So we're going to look for these predictable patterns of muscle imbalance in these 5 key kinetic chain checkpoints. The foot and ankle complex, the knee complex, the lumbopelvic hip complex, the shoulders, and the cervical spine. Those are our 5 points, right? And if we see like, hey, like let's say we see like, you know, an anterior pelvic tilt, that lower cross syndrome, well, what we're seeing here is we know that there are some muscles that are overly lengthened. These abdominal muscles are being pulled into length. And then we see these muscles down here, which are being pulled short, right? Like the low back is pulling, the psoas and hip flexors are pulling like crazy, right? And so it's causing the whole pelvis to kind of shift forward. So the glutes are also being pulled into length, right? So this is overly lengthened, this is overly lengthened, and this is overly shortened, along with this being overly shortened back here in the low back as well, even though it's not in the picture. So it's causing this anterior shift because there's a muscle imbalance. One muscle on one side of the joint is pulling more than it's supposed to, and the other muscle on the other side of the joint is not pulling as much as it's supposed to. So when we look at these, we're going to look at our client's dynamic postural observations. AKA, we're going to put them through a squat and we're going to see how well their body moves during that, right? So these dynamic movements are squatting, pushing, pulling, or maybe doing a little bit of balance, right? And this is always very, you know, important for our clients. But with weight loss clients, sometimes this can be challenging. Like a body weight squat could be pretty freaking tough. So this can be incorporated as a first workout with your clients as well. So the first one to look at is the overhead squat assessment. You know, I actually really like to use assessments as like a first training session where I will basically do a couple sets of the overhead squat. I'll do a couple sets of like the pushing assessment, a couple sets of the pulling assessment. Now I've worked their chest, back, and legs. And then I might have them do, you know, maybe like some shoulder wall angels to assess their shoulder mobility. That's not in this book, but you will see it later. I'll have them do like a couple different things, and it will feel like a workout. And they'll be like, God, I'm kind of sore the next day. And it's always kind of nice because you're like, well, that was just the assessment. And they're like, man, what a great trainer. I'm sore from the assessment. We haven't even worked it out yet. So for the overhead squat, have your client stand with feet shoulder width apart, arms fully extended overhead with their arms in line with their ears, their biceps in line with their ears there. And then you're going to have your client squat to a comfortable position, right? And you're going to look to see, can they do this, in an ideal squat? This lady right here is crushing it. This is a nice straight line all the way down, right? And then that line is very similar to this line here. Those lines are basically parallel to one another, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for those parallel lines. If we have the line drop too far forward, we have an excessive forward lean. If we have the line come to upwards, we have a low back arch or an inadequate forward lean. So, and then also like taking a look at the knees, right? We're looking to see, is the pelvis in line with the second and third toe? That's the middle of your foot. A lot of people will aim it up for their big toe, and it's like, no, that's actually the inside of your foot, right? We're going for the center. So we see that going straight down in a nice straight line versus, maybe caving in like this, which is going to cause the feet to flatten. And then usually if somebody is caving in like this, it'll also cause their feet to turn out. But these are, kind of the classic versions here. Then we see, excessive lean. We also see arms falling forward, which is showing tightness in the pectorals and latissimus dorsi there. So that's the overhead squat. And then we've got the single leg squat, right? So this is really good for assessing like ankle proprioception, how well your client is able to like move their ankle the way they're supposed to. It's also really good for core strength and hip joint stability. We're looking to see like, can they balance on one leg as they squat down? May not be appropriate for every client. But basically see it as a progression from the overhead squat. If your client does the overhead squat fairly well, great, let's have them do the single leg squat. And we're going to look to see, does that knee stay in alignment the whole time? If it does, they have great ankle proprioception, they have great core strength, and they have great mobility. But we're going to look to see, does the knees cave in? For the record, this does, I know we've talked about this before, this gets way more complicated once you guys get to capstone. You will start to see, we are going to look for the knees caving out. We're going to look to see hip hikes or hip drops. And then you're going to look to see hip rotation inward or outward. So you'll see people like rotate. And they all mean ever so slightly different things. This, Lorianne, we were talking about we were talking about QL stuff the other day, that quadratus lumborum. This hip hike and the hip drop, that's caused by like, that Trendelenburg gait that we were talking about. We get the people who are doing like the sexy walk. The painful sexy walk. So that is so summarizing everything up. I mean, there's a lot to summarize today, but we use fitness assessments to determine the appropriate flexibility exercises to give our clients. That's based on the overhead and single leg squat and our other posture assessments. Oh, I forgot to show you, by the way, that is also up on NASM's website for download. Here's our cardio assessment. So you get their resting heart rate, you estimated their heart rate max, blood pressure if you have it, YMCA step test, or Rockport walk test, or you could have them do a 1 mile run, or you could have them do a VT talk test. VT1, VT2 talk test is basically where you are measuring their heart rate, where they are officially like out of breath. It helps them use the talk test. Like if your client can breathe comfortably, that's zone 1. If they can breathe a little bit uncomfortably and still hold a conversation, like it's like not like a little breathy, that's zone 2. And if they are like not able to talk, that's zone 3. So that's, and you can just write down what heart rates they get, what heart rates they get to those things are. So there's other cardio assessments out there, but you would do that and then you can just circle where they would land. But the posture assessment, here's the, what that kind of looks like, right? So we have our static postural assessment. So we just observe them as they're just standing, right? And we look to see, do they have like that pes planus syndrome, which is the fancy new way that they're saying the pronation distortion syndrome. Oh my God, that's great. Look at that. You can see like the flattening feet, right? Ideally, we want to have, not too much foot contact, mostly in the heel and like this section here, right? That's kind of cool. I wish we had more photos like that, but you can see here, right? That collapsing. Or we're going to see lower cross syndrome, the anterior pelvic tilt, right? Or we're going to see the upper cross syndrome, the upper back rounding, that hunched shoulder posture. Then we're going to get into the overhead squat. Do the feet turn out? Do the knees cave in? Do they excessively lean? Does their low back arch? Do their arms fall forward? Right? We're asking all those questions we just looked at, and you're going to circle, where you see those things. Same thing for the single leg squat, right? Do the knees cave in? And then pushing and pulling isn't in our PowerPoint, but it is a big part of things. So talking about it here, having your client do like a cable chest press, and you're looking to see, do the shoulders elevate? Do they arch their low back? Does their head jut forward? And the same thing is true during like a pulling assessment. You can have them do any variation of like a rowing action. But that's what we're going to look for to see like how they're moving, right? So once we see all that, we're going to see, okay, well, if they're meeting all the criteria for pes planus syndrome, all right, there we go. Overactive muscles, underactive muscles. Or if they have lower cross syndrome, there's our overactive, there's our underactive. So now we have a working list. The overactive stuff, let's stretch it out. Let's foam roll it. Let's beat it up. Let's get those knots out of there, and let's stretch out those muscles. Keep them from being active. And then we got our underactive muscles. Like, let's turn those on. Let's get those muscles working the way that they're supposed to. So a lot of really good resources on NASM's website there. For the record, there's other really good ones too. You can see here's a 1 rep max chart. They got a lot of really cool stuff up here. Then they also got like all these freaking webinars and podcasts. Like if you want to see like, if you're wanting to more deeply review the OPT model and stuff, you can check out these like webinars here, which are kind of fun. But yeah, that's actually about it for today. I mean, hopefully you guys don't feel like you need to review those things like crazy. That's literally what we are going over in every one of these program design classes, but can never hurt. All right. Bay, Jerica, Lorianne, you guys got any questions today? You feeling good? Question?
I'm good.
All right.
I think.
We had one. You guys know.
Okay, what is the difference between the stroke volume and the cardiac? What is that, cardiac output and the stroke volume?
Yeah, they kind of feel similar because stroke volume is like the one of the two that we pay more attention to, like between heart rate and stroke volume. So stroke volume is just how much blood your heart is beating per beat. Obviously, that's really important, but heart rate is also important. So cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume. So cardiac output's the overall performance of the heart, made up of how often your heart can beat and how much blood is pumped per beat. Put those two things together.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you're beating, let's say 10 units of blood every time your heart beats, and then your heart is beating 55 times in a minute, 55 times 10, you are pumping 550 units of blood throughout your body every minute. That's your overall cardiac output. So let's say your stroke volume drops to 9, 55 times 9. I've screwed myself by picking a number that I can't do in my head. That's going to be 495 units of blood. You now have a lower cardiac output.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right, thank you, honey. Have a
course.
good day. Bye, everyone.
All right, guys. We'll see you
Bye.
tomorrow.